The Learn unit is lingo that comes from Dr. Douglas Greer, who's professor emeritus at Teachers College at Columbia University. Dr. Greer has spent a career of more than 40 years in behavioral education. He's really interested in applying behavior analysis to education. He's even developed a school founded in behavior analysis called the Comprehensive Application of Behavior Analysis to Schooling, or a CABAS school. And they've got schools in New Jersey and around the world that are these ABA schools. And he has this really nice analysis of the ABC interaction as it applies to learning. And the reason I'm going into this, by the way, is that it will come back later on when we talk about strategies in the IEP. So the Learn unit is a way of talking about those ABC interactions. It is a measure of teaching, right, as I've kind of illustrated. It explicitly describes the interaction between what the teacher does and what the student does and looks at it as an integrated dance, right? Our students aren't operating in isolation, and neither are we. We need to be looking at all of our interactions with our students in terms of the Learn unit. So it is the fundamental measure of teaching. Here's your take-home point. And you'll notice this little visual prompt that I put in a number of slides, right? They always say at a talk, you're gonna go home and forget 95% of what you heard, right? These are the 5% items. The take-home punchlines. I'm identifying them for you. The presence and number of Learn units is the strongest predictor of effective teaching. I said that point earlier when I said active student responding, opportunities to respond and do is the greatest predictor of learning, right? Those are Learn units. The more you do, the more you'll learn. You probably heard that description of to be an expert, you have to do something for 10,000 hours. Well, convert that into this frame of mind. It means you're doing a lot of Learn units, right? If you're gonna be a maestro on the piano, you engage in a lot of Learn units on the piano, a lot of interactions with your teacher, and you behave, and there's consequences, and it's naturally shaped over time, right? You have to do a lot. So we need our students to be acting and behaving in order to learn. That's their part of the Learn unit. I actually found something on my LinkedIn feed a couple days ago by Michael Maloney, who I cited here. Michael Maloney is an educator. I think he's in Toronto, and he specializes in literacy instruction. And he does amazing work remediating reading problems in kids with and without developmental disabilities. And he talked about, he has this article, when the pace of instruction is bass-ackward. And he's talking about the fact that there's this idea, especially when it comes to kids with special needs, that they need a whole lot more processing time. You gotta slow everything down. And there's some pretty good research that shows when you slow things down, they're not engaging in as many Learn units. And this applies when I say they, I mean any student isn't engaging in as many Learn units. They're not actively participating. There's more downtime. When there's more downtime, I'm not attending. I can become distracted. The more I'm doing, the more I'm learning. So if you slow the pace down for me, you're actually slowing down the learning rate available to me. And he talks about when he does phonics instruction with students with developmental disabilities, he's got a scripted phonics plan that requires each target word to be attacked 4 different ways phonetically, and he aims to do those 4 different ways for each of 5 words in 1 minute. Right? So that's 20 responses from a student in 1 minute. That's a response every 3 seconds. And his data and his anecdotes show that students do better when the pace of instruction is pretty rapid. And one of the mistakes he identifies is when students a teacher mistake is when a student makes a mistake, they slow down. And actually that's not always necessary. Now there's exceptions to every rule, right? And you can understand those. But you're kind of disengaging the student if you're slowing down. You should maintain an appropriately rapid pace, even in error correction. Another anecdote that comes to mind from my experience is I worked with a young guy named Matthew early in my career. And Matthew was a student when I met him. He wasn't toilet trained. He didn't speak. We taught him picture exchange. Worked with him intensively in preschool. And then I had the opportunity to go with him as a special education assistant in the public schools, hired by the school to be his SEA for 2 years through kindergarten and grade 1. It was a fantastic learning experience. I got to be an SEA on the inside of the system. And I've walked a mile in your shoes or 2 years in your shoes. I can appreciate the contingencies operating. And one of the things that struck me, because we worked with him so intensively at home, was how much less he had to do at school. And he was in a grade 1 class with Miss Simeonidis, and I keep in touch with Miss Simeonidis because she's a remarkable, fantastic, dedicated grade 1 teacher. I'd be happy to put my kids in Miss S's classroom. But I noticed that Matthew didn't seem to have to do as much work in Miss S's classroom as he did at home with us after school and on the weekends with his therapy team. So we actually turned this into an empirical question. We took some data and we tracked the number of instructions, which means the number of Learn units, the number of times he was actively engaged in doing over his therapy sessions. And in a 2-hour therapy session, the average number of responses he made was 400. 2 hours with a therapist, 400 learning interactions. And then we took similar data in the school over an entire school week. And over the entire school week, he had 11 instructions from the teacher. 400 in 2 hours to 11 in the entire week. Right? So that's a remarkable shift in the intensity. And he did really, really well when he had a fast pace of rapid instruction. And then when he's in the classroom where he's one of 30, right, he only has to respond once of every 30 or less, right? And Miss S was going out of her way, actually. And in part, I'm there as a bit of a prompt. She keeps calling on him. He still had to engage in group responding, right? But this was like individually called on. Matthew, what's the answer to this? Matthew, do this, right? 11 times in the whole week. So that's really not enough learn units. And one of the things I'll talk about tomorrow is group strategies to improve that for the entire class, for all students, which will also benefit students with autism. So I'll save that for tomorrow, because that's the strategy to address this problem. But you can understand and appreciate the problem, right? Our students need to be doing a lot. In particular, a student with autism, one of the challenges with students with autism is they haven't been attending to the appropriate stimuli their entire lives, right? We know this from brain imaging and studies that show where do kids with autism look. They don't look at eyes for information, they look at mouths, they look at inanimate or moving objects in the environment. And the cumulative effect of that over time is that they're paying attention to the wrong things. And after years and years of paying attention to the wrong things, it's hard to learn in a typical learning environment. Right? Does that make sense? So if I'm in a typical learning environment and I'm not being actively engaged with a lot of responding, then something is going to fill the void, right? Stereotypy, off task, leaving, and those are just symptoms of the fact that the instruction isn't paced quickly enough, right? Now, some of you customer teachers are going, but how can I keep them working that hard 30 hours a week at school, right? That's not possible, so that's not the expectation. But tomorrow we will talk a bit about strategies to remediate that to some extent. But the point here is, punchline, the more learn units, the more responding your student can have. Think about this broadly applied. If you want your student to have success going to the pool, go to the pool a lot. If you want them to have success riding the bus, ride the bus a lot, right? The more you do, the more learning opportunities you're creating. If you have a goal in your IEP, for example, I'm going off task a little bit here, but it's something like, well, make a sandwich, and you make a sandwich, every 2 weeks. That's not enough learning opportunities, right? I can make my breakfast because I make my breakfast every day. I've got daily learning opportunities. So think of this, remember this issue of learn units and the importance of doing when it comes to implementing, because I see a lot of problems in IEPs where it says, well, we'll do it, twice a week, or we'll do it once a month. For a lot of things, that simply won't be enough learning opportunities, right? It probably wouldn't be enough learning opportunities for a typically developing student, never mind someone with a developmental disability. Example of a correct learn unit. Teacher says, how many of you have finished questions 1 through 9 in chapter 4 of the math textbook that we reviewed last Tuesday? And all the hands go up. And the teacher says, well done, everybody. There's your antecedent, clear, the group response, and a consequence. What's good about this antecedent? What did the teacher do correctly in her responsibility in the learn unit? She gave a really, really clear instruction, right? Clear instructions are important. We want to use economy of words with our students with autism. If you're going to deliver an instruction to a student, and of course you have to yoke this to their language cognitive level, but the general advice is, economy of words. Keep it simple, keep it clear and concise. Don't bog it down with unnecessary words in the sentence, right? This is an example of a nice clean antecedent in a learn unit, as opposed to the same instruction done incorrectly. Oh, I almost forgot, class, before you go. How many of you finished that thing that we talked about? Those questions from, we talked about it a while back, do you remember? Because I see teachers doing this, flustered at the end of the day, and 2 hands go up, right? And you know those 2 students, right? They're going to Harvard, right? Because they know more than the teacher knows, right? They've already anticipated what she's gonna ask, right? You don't have to worry about those, but it's all the rest of the students who look confused, like, what is she talking about? What did we do? And the response there is, don't look at her. Like, no eye contact, so I don't want her to call on me. And the students go, oh, why aren't they answering, right? This is part of that professional humility, right? There's a phrase in behavior analysis that comes from Dr. Ogden Lindsley, who had a 40-year career in education. And Ogden Lindsley told us that the student is always right. Don't blame the student. The student is doing what we've taught the student to do. If the student's not doing what you want, it's because you haven't taught it appropriately, right? And I like that because it makes us take responsibility for what's going on, right? We have to exercise continually professional humility and the idea of, okay, if something's not working, I can't just say, well, it's the student, oh, it's his autism, right? I have to look at what can I do because I own 2/3 of the learn unit. I have to identify potentially my mistakes and fix my mistakes. That's that ongoing professional humility, right? And so that's what's needed here is for the teacher to recognize, oh, I just gave a terrible instruction. Right? And we all do this, right? I know that you can identify times when you do it. When I teach university classes, this is something I've had to struggle with because I have this tendency to ask a question and then the students are looking at me like, what does he want, right? And then I realize I gave a bad antecedent for this learn unit. I needed to be clear in what I'm leading them to, right? If I'm asking a question and no one's kind of picking it up and I'm like, why aren't they getting this? Haven't they done the reading? I'd be blaming them as opposed to being humble and going, okay, my responsibility in the learn unit here, I need to be better in my questions, right? I work on that. So we all have to be working on the clarity of our instructions. And we do this with our kids as parents. We do this with our spouses, right? We make errors. You're thinking of examples. We make errors in our learn units. So take responsibility for our 2/3. As an aside for evaluating learn units, Dr. Greer and colleagues at the CABIS program at Columbia Teachers College, they developed the Teacher Performance Rate and Accuracy Scale, the TPRA.